mean, I think there's sort of two hypotheses. One would be maybe you have more option value, so you can treat your partner worse, kind of, or at least you perceive you have more option value because the pool has increased. But I don't think that's it. I think that there's this sense of it's just a lot easier to because you're seeing this selected sample of other people, you infer that your own relationship is much worse than it actually is. You know what I mean? The
Oh, I
same way,
see.
like people's like jobs, or they see other people only on vacation, and they're like, "Oh, my life sucks." It's like, come on, dude.
So you think that's why there has been more fights? I don't even know, to be honest. Is that true? Like, my anecdotal evidence is yes, is that yes, people appear to be more like short-tempered with anything that doesn't go their way.
Yeah,
Uh, in relationships, in like friendships, everywhere. I
yeah.
don't know.
I
Yeah.
mean, based on um, a very small sample of friends that I know who have recently gotten divorced, the almost all of them, the commonality is like, at least stated to me, so who knows, but it's like unreasonable expectation. Like out of nowhere, expectations just completely changed. And it's not like expectations changed after the birth of a child or after some life event. It's just like they just changed in a way that is is crazy, and like I guess you gotta either renegotiate the contract or it's untenable, kind of. But the way some of them describe how the expectations changed feel like, oh, somehow one party feels like they don't have enough, even though nothing has actually changed. Like, I don't know. So that, I mean, it's got to be an informational thing at that point, right? I don't know. I bet there's data on this. I bet that most issues in the past revolved around infidelity or financial uh, mismanagement or financial scarcity or something like that. And I bet that those kind of reasons have gone down a lot. I bet they explain a way smaller share of, um, or they're given their stated explanations are way less.
I haven't studied this, so I have read several books related to that, and one one thing that people talk about that has appeared to increase are things like, for instance, you see a lot in the dating scene of people that are 20 years younger than us,
Well,
and the reason why they stop seeing someone, it's almost like it feels like Seinfeld episodes, you know?
totally
It feels
trivial.
like it
Totally.
was like total trivial reasons. It's like, are you kidding me? Like you're
Yeah.
not gonna start seeing this guy because of that reason. Are you serious?
Yeah.
And part of the reason, of course, is that the choice set has grown a lot with
Yeah.
apps like that, right?
Yeah.
And there's always the next shiny thing.
Right.
Uh, so I don't know if you have read this book about, I think, the art of choice, where this, I think she's a professor at
Oh,
either
you mentioned
anyway,
it. Yeah.
Colombia. Yeah, and I think in the first or second chapter, she talks about how in most metrics one can measure. And again, as you know, metrics are
Yeah.
subjective, but in most metrics one can measure, like those marriages that are arranged appear to do better in the long
Yeah.
run, which is kind of interesting, right?
Yeah.
When a third party chooses your partner, on
Exactly.
average, of course, you might do better. Just
Yeah.
it sounds like we human beings are not very good at
Not
making
good
the
at
best
choices. Yeah.
choice for our future selves.
I mean, I wonder if it's the same kind of thing going on with, at least anecdotally, it seems like it's similar with jobs where people's expectations of what they should be doing at their job has changed since they entered into the contract to work at the job. So obviously COVID was a big thing where people expectations about when and where to work changed a lot. um, from this exogenous thing. But I think that obviously shifted sort of the employee employer relationship. But I feel like other things as well that people just don't, people expect that they are not going to be monitored as strictly, or they're going to have more, I don't know. It seems like, or that they, expectations of wage growth. I don't know, but I think that expectations might have gotten unmoored, or have drifted more recently than in the past. And a good candidate for that would be sort of these social comparisons, right? Have,
Yeah, I do have some friends who are entrepreneurs and they have companies. Most of them are restaurants,
uh-huh.
locally and non-locally. And a common thread there that I hear is that new employees are really hard to get because they have unreasonable expectations.
They don't want to
Not
come
only
into work.
unreasonable
Yeah.
expectation about salary, but also unreasonable expectation about what they can do at work or something like that.
Yeah. We have a bakery right by our house, and they started closing down. They used to only be closed on Sundays, and then he said we're going to be closed on Sunday and Monday. And I was like, "Oh, what happened? What's going on?" He's like, "I can't find anybody to work here." And then being the asshole economist, I was like, "So did you like raise your wages?" You
Exactly.
know? And he's like, and he says it's not about that. I'm more than willing to pay much higher amounts. It's so hard to find somebody that's going to actually come 3 days in a row to work. Like, people will just say at the last minute, "Oh, I'm not coming in," and he can't run a. He's I have to prep the dough the night before. I need to know how many pounds of flour I should be making because I can't make all these many cakes and cookies and stuff. And it's like there's just it's impossible to find reliable people to work. He's probably around 60 years old now, and he's had this bakery for 30 years. And it's like it's now it's this tiny little shop that's become very famous. And he said he would usually have um, one person who is kind of older, used to be his age, now probably in 40s or something, and then two or three sort of people in their early 20s that would be working in his place, and there'd be two to three people working at any point in time. And he's like, now it's just impossible to hire people in their early 20s because he tries and then they just don't come to work. That's such a weird. It's so, and maybe it's because they think they have another thing lined up, or they don't view it as. I don't know. There's sort of this difference between viewing things as jobs and careers, and it's okay to view certain things as jobs and then to still do them. But I wonder if now, if it's not viewed as a career, you just completely treat it like crap, you know?
So I know, of course, everything I'm going to say here is going to be a very simplified version of it. But
Yeah.
how much can we explain this by pure by the pure notion of delayed gratification? Like people are less likely to be okay with delayed gratification now.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly why. I think the most obvious conjecture will be because of this new world of social media, the new world where everything is shiny and it gets our attention, and people perhaps might not even be developing the muscle
Yeah.
of not paying
Patience.
attention,
Yeah.
of patience, and paying attention on this abstract notion of the future or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's, I wonder, do we know anything about how discount rates have changed over time? Have they changed over time?
I do not know anything about that, but I think this will be to the extent that this can show up in discount rates, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much they value the future self versus the current
Yeah.
self. I
Exactly.
actually,
Well, I
I,
guess that's the
I
difference. I
actually,
mean, I mean, it could be also that. So, I mean, I think what you're talking about, this sort of, this time inconsistency kind of thing, I could
no, no,
imagine
no, no.
people more hyperbolic, but
No, no, sure, sure, sure. I'm talking about two different things, right? We're
Yeah,
talking about two different things. When there is a trade-off between what you want today versus what you want in the future,
yeah,
that can be the fact that perhaps there could be dynamic inconsistency. That
yeah,
is, when you look back, you realize that they made bad choices related to that. But
yeah,
I'm also talking, even if you are a dynamically consistent
yeah,
person, you
yeah,
could put, that's the classic interpretive
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
You
Just
put just
lower.
less weight in the future.
Sure.
So either of those two things could be
Yeah, I think
happening.
both are. Yeah, and I think probably I would conjecture that both are happening, but um,
Yeah, I don't know what you think about this, honestly, because this is very related to the last conversation we had. I think part of the reason why people are not as okay with this delayed gratification is because we are rewarding people who live a lifestyle that are not okay with delayed gratification. And
yeah,
we are punishing people with a lifestyle that are okay with delayed gratification. And it's not like that does not mean that we are only selecting onto some people and not others. It's just that even me, like a person who was originally more into delayed gratification, I think I'm more likely to be less into delayed gratification
yeah.
now. Everybody's changing who we are because, incentives matter after all.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think in general? This kind of raises an interesting question that let's imagine you're playing some game with a bunch of other people, and let's say other people's um, let's say other people start discounting the future more heavily, and they move much more into the present. They become impatient. Do you think it's optimal, privately optimal for you to become like them, or are you do you is your return to having more patience even higher? Like I think in some ways,
Yeah,
return to patience may have grown in certain ways, but in other ways, it makes it hard to coexist with other people, right?
I definitely agree. I think this is a very interesting question. And the classic answer, it depends, I think, is involved here, right? Because on the one hand, I usually think about that with my students, to some extent, the return of showing up has gone up because of that, right? Just
Yeah,
the
yeah,
the the return of just being a person who is dependable has
yeah,
gone up because of that, for producing things, I guess. But it is also true that you there are some prescription, there are some expectations in general that people have over you about how you should behave, and
yeah,
social norms matter.
yeah,
And if you go away from that social norm, you may get some punishment. You may be less likely to enter a network. You may be less likely to have some power over a network or something like that.
yeah,
So it's possible that people will naturally gravitate towards being impatience as well. That would be the optimal decision on their part
yeah,
because of that. So there is a trade-off there, perhaps. On It's almost like a trade-off between consumption and production, right?
yeah. I
They
mean,
would
you could
like to.
imagine on the consumption side, like everybody around you is maxing out their credit cards, and you have to live that kind of lifestyle, and so even though you would prefer to save, right, and you're being pushed into more consumption versus savings.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah,
this is kind of an obvious example, right? Like everybody now has this shiny thing,
yeah,
and everybody pays attention more on them and not you. So
yeah.
it's natural that there's going to be some
Ego.
arms race going on there, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
But I think it's more than that. Like for instance, I think you can think about things like everybody wants to go to a bar to drink beer
yeah,
because they don't care about tomorrow.
yeah,
And now you are left with a social norm that the way your friends like to hang out is with drinking beer and not drinking coffee. And
yeah,
now you have to go drink beer because there's no other option for you. See?
yeah,
And then tomorrow you are mad at yourself, at your
yeah,
previous self.
yeah, yeah. Right.
So I think there are several social norms that are evolving as a function of that. I think this goes back to our last conversation. I don't think people properly estimate the return, the fundamental problems that are happening as a function of algorithms as a function of the business model of companies and so on.
Yeah.
All those things are happening in the background, and it's changing the whole fabric of society.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so what you're describing is kind of with that last bit is sort of there's some sort of exogenous shift in these discount rates, maybe due to these innovations. But I always wonder, like, to what extent are to what extent are these things endogenous and like we can control our discount rate. So for example, it could be the case that if you imagine in some evolutionary way, you have some kind of like Becker and Rayo kind of world, this evolutionary setup where you are basically changing your kind of deeper parameters in order to maximize some fitness criteria, right? And so it turns out that, or maybe not you are, nature is, let's say. And it turns out that because you start doing these things, you're kind of being affected by these, you're trying to conform to these social norms and you're doing things more in the present at the expense of the future and so on and so forth. Well, in order to make that, to kind of reconcile that with optimal behavior, you and your discount rate adjusts and you start actually discounting the future really um, extremely, right? Like I are we are we actively it becomes hard because then it's hard to know what welfare is, right? When these things are changing. But are we doing this on purpose? Like, let's say this is happening, and now I come up with some app that if you use this app for 10 minutes a day, it's going to reduce your discount rate. Or it's gonna make you discount the future more and more and more. It's gonna make you fundamentally more impatient. You might say, hey, I'm going to be doing this crazy stuff and not saving money and things like that. So I would be better off. I would be better off discounting the future more. So maybe I should use this app. You know what I'm saying? Um, it gets weird, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Like the opposite is let's say these I think the sales pitch of these mindfulness apps and stuff like that is, hey, we're going to slow you down, we're going to make you more patient. It's almost like, hey, if you use this app, we're going to tune your fundamental parameters in a certain way. Right? And we're going to give you that tune up and we're going to push those in a way that's going to make you better off, whatever that means. um
Except for the fact that I think most of those apps, they are certainly most people that are using those apps, they are inside this paradigm of optimization already,
yes.
right? So,
Yes.
so Carol has been working quite a bit about this idea that why one should meditate, right? Which is she has this fairly new perspective on why somebody should meditate, which has
Okay.
nothing to do with this optimization, this idea, oh, I want to be more productive and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of I, I I I think it's an interesting approach, but essentially it relates quite a bit to this idea of uh, you and I were talking last time about paying attention on the things that are not measurable. I mean, look at you, for instance, us right now paying attention to kids or friends of ours who are teenagers, right?
Uh-huh.
We look at them the same way as we looked at us back then and realize, oh my God, they pay so much attention on what other people think, right? And we see ourselves now as people that look at them and say, well, that does not matter nearly as much, right?
Yeah.
But imagine if you were to ask your previous self, maybe 30 years ago, so when you were like 15 or something like that, you
Yeah.
were ask yourself, hey, you should know that your future self would one day understand that the truth is what other people think does not matter as
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Of course, they will still have a point, which is, boys gotta eat. I need to live my life right now, and I
Yeah.
want my friends. I want to have this kind of status in society. So I still need to pay a little bit attention of what these other people say.
Yeah.
But then you, your 45-year-old self, look back and realize, hey, I agree. So we need to put weight on your current self. That's fine.
Yeah.
But you need to understand that you put just too much attention on what your friends are thinking right now. And being an independent thinker matters a lot more. You're going to reduce a lot more your suffering, even
Yeah.
your suffering as a 15-year-old, let alone your future benefits, right? It's going to be a better thing for you to do that.
Yeah.
So now imagine if the 15-year-old, you imagine if that 15-year-old internalizes that idea. And
Hmm.
now he really wants to improve on that, right? If you think about that's very analogous to what a 45-year-old right now going to an app like a Sam Harris app wants to be better as a dad or be better as a worker or something like that. They want to optimize a particular measure, which
Yeah.
we are fixing here. The metric here, which we are fixing, is the idea of thinking less about what other people think, right?
Okay.
If you think about it, what is the best approach to arrive there? I think there's a case to be made that the best approach is to just grow up, as in live your life with all kinds of weird things that's going to happen in your life, and eventually you will learn not only that specific aspect, but you
But
will
other
learn a
stuff.
lot more other aspects. You know,
This is you're saying between 15 and 45, and
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
As a 15-year-old, what you need to do is that you need to understand that as you're having more experiences as you're growing up, you're going to essentially become a person who realizes that this matters less. We pay too much attention on these metrics, but the problem about those metrics is that there are almost like an infinite number of those metrics, and all of them are sort of like endpoints. And if you want to optimize one, you may not be optimizing another.
Yeah.
So instead, perhaps you might want to pay attention on those intermediate, let's call bundle of skills. Like for instance, the skill of delayed gratification, or
Yeah.
this which essentially has tremendous downstream effects on all kinds of things,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or the skill of being curious, which essentially leads you to start realizing, hey, that person who's a 15-year-old who doesn't think enough about their friends for whatever reason, he or she could be just selected to be like that because of genetic reasons or whatever. That person seems to be better in terms of her mental health. So maybe this is a good thing. You
Yeah.
start being curious to kind of being Bayesian, being formulating hypotheses, being testing this hypothesis, being updating the priors, right? So you start realizing that certain skills, if you focus on those more broad skills, which are extremely hard to measure, because that's the problem.
Yeah.
Broad
Yeah.
skills, by the very fact that they are broad, they're very hard to measure.
Right.
And instead, just think about all these things that are metrics as more like these downstream measures, you see?
Yeah.
So that is essentially, that is my perspective of what Carol explained to me about why she thinks one should
So what's the
meditate,
connection to
which is
meditation? And that's what I'm not
because
seeing.
because meditation
Oh, it's one of these
is
broad things that has
meditation creates
broad
this
ends.
ability to perceive more. And if you start perceiving more, it has tremendous multipliers everywhere.
I see.
It just has
So this is
multipliers
one way to
everywhere.
develop one of these broad
Yeah.
skills with
Well,
these
yeah.
broad
I think
downstream.
the way she would, yeah, the way she would pose this point, which is not necessarily the way I would pose this point, but I think a lot of people would respond positively to the way she would pose this point,
Yeah.
is you should meditate because you should grow up. So as in, if you ask a baby,
Yeah.
if you were able to speak to a baby, hey, do you think your life is going to be better when you grow up? The baby's going to say, for sure, I'm going to be it's almost like an imperative for me. I want to grow up. I want to become a
Yeah.
grow up. If you ask a teenager, do you want to continue being a teenager? No, he or she wants to grow up. And because there are lots of things that
Yeah.
you're going to happen in your life. It turns out that this is something that happened to me, but this is something that particularly happened to Carol, is that once you start meditating, you start realizing that there are certain notions of reality that a normal adult that doesn't meditate does not see, that a person who meditates see. Very similar to, like for instance, if you take your teenager to the Louvre Museum, he
Yeah.
or she is not going to perceive nearly enough as you would, even though he or she is, they're seeing things the same way. I mean, it happened to me with when I went to Rome with my 1-year-old. So Olivia was 1 when I took
Yeah.
her to Rome, and I was thinking, oh my God, I was going to say the Vatican, and I was saying, oh
Yeah.
my God, she's missing this. But she was actually looking at the same thing as I
Yeah, but
was.
not
It's
the
just
same
that her
impact.
processing of that information was very different from the way I was processing information. So naturally, it's exactly the same point. It's like the perception grows,
Yeah.
but it doesn't end as an adult, like the way we think about. We do know, like any two persons, you get it. One person may perceive more than the other at a given point in time. But the point here is that sometimes if you close your eyes and you start lowering down the inputs in your
Yeah.
life, you will realize that there's more. There is actually more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the point is like, why should you meditate? Because you should grow up. As in, no person would ever say, "Oh, I would not like to grow up. I would like to continue pooping in my pants and having a diapers."
Yeah.
Nobody wants. Everybody is thinking, you know what? I would like to keep going. I would like to keep going because uh, perhaps certainly not necessarily everybody would be thinking about that. But if you go and rationalize, if that person was smart enough, like we are as an adult, I mean, you ask yourself, would you like to go back and become a 15-year-old for the rest of your life? And your answer is hell no,
Yeah.
right? So with that kind of perception that you currently have, you know that it doesn't make sense for you to stay where you are. As in, at least for a lot of people would think, no, I'm curious, I would like to keep going, you know.
Yeah.
The same way as uh, with your current information, you would like to ask your baby self to keep growing, or with your previous information, you would like your teenager self to keep growing. Uh, that is her point. But the key point here is that you don't necessarily grow up by saying, "I need to solve this specific
Yeah.
thing that I am." For instance, if you were to create a metric about what an adult is versus what a teenager is, you come up with lots of differences that can be measurable. But the point here is that there are a much smaller set of skills that cause them all.
Yeah.
That plus exposure to diversity, exposure to new experiences and things like that, right?
Yeah.
This reminds me a lot of that. Now that I'm thinking, this reminds me a lot of that book about how to raise a child, like the Carpenter and the Gardener. Have you heard of that? I
No.
think her name is Alison Gopnik. The analogy she uses, like, how would you raise a flower, like a gardener, right? You need to create the best environment possible for that flower to grow, but then
Yeah.
let her grow in the way, shape, or form that she wants to grow, or something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But a carpenter, the way they grow will be, let's just try to mold exactly how you want that to happen.
Yeah.
So her whole point is that you probably would like to raise your kid, of course, like a gardener. You just want to create this environment with low stress and a lot of opportunities for you to learn, and let that kid go where he or she may. But the problem here is that if you do that, if you realize that the kinds of things that you need to do, it's a much shorter list. See, you need to create an environment with very
Yeah.
low stress and a few things. You need to kind of behave with your kid as if you are more like a coach and not like an actual authority figure.
Yeah.
To help him or her to deal with the next obstacle or something like that. You need to give them some additional resources. But other than that, everything else which we tend to measure,
Just let it grow.
you let it be.
Yeah.
Again, I know it's complicated. It's really hard to think about this as a parent. I sometimes I find that analogy breaks for me.
Yeah.
But I think there's a connection there between this notion of Gardner and this idea that we were discussing last time of this fixation that people have on metrics.
Yeah.
And I think this relates a lot to the discussion we're just having about this fundamental intolerance that people have to anything that is different from what they currently want. I think this brittleness, right? The fact that people are so brittle in their current view and they have so little adaptation about what if I'm wrong, or what if this other person has a point, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think this idea of delayed gratification is connected to the idea of cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
The idea of cognitive dissonance that we discussed a lot last time, and the idea of delayed gratification, which is to not only pay attention on the resolution that you currently have, but rather on future resolutions, on resolution of your future self and so on.
I think of delayed gratification. It's a solution to a there's a friction, there exists a friction, and it's a workaround to that friction. And what is the friction? We're not able to time travel, right? If we're able to time travel, then you could just do stuff in whatever period you wanted to do, right? But because we're not able to time travel, I have to wait until future period T before I make my decisions in future period T, right? And so on and so forth. And so this delayed gratification is how we kind of navigate this friction that exists. And
Uh, Try to explain to me. I don't think of course, I understand
so,
that there's something that is connected to time travel, but for me, the friction here
yeah,
is that there's in math language, there's a state variable, as in
yeah,
choices that you make today do affect what happens in the future,
sure.
but the other way around, in principle, at least as far as you know, does not happen, right?
But let's forget about that. So I agree, and that makes it even richer. But imagine a world where what you do today does not affect what you do tomorrow at all. Okay?
Okay.
There's nothing at all like that. And I know that I have to make a profile of decisions for the next 10 days, and I can only make those decisions in those days, right? Okay, well,
If you are in that
I take it
situation,
back.
then you
If
solve the
yeah,
problem. Then you don't
it's
have a
yeah,
Bellman
I take
equation
it. So
anymore. You
so we
solve
have
the
yeah,
problem
we
with the
have
flow
this
utility.
linkage. But yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
we do have this kind of linkage, but basically if you were able to if you had time travel, right? You could turn this 10 period problem into a single period problem and solve it. And you don't. And this kind of delayed gratification is one way that, and maybe this is getting into, maybe I'm relying on timing consistency here actually, but it's getting into a way that we can sort of, if you have, let's say we all are somewhat present biased, but we have like what matters is both the beta and the delta, right? And if we have this very big delta where we are thinking about the future, even if we do have this beta that's distorting to the present, it's not going to matter as much. So it's like a kind of a workaround from our friction of being present biased and not being able to do the entire profile and commit to this entire ten period profile, right? And so patience is a way that we've developed to deal with this friction of present bias uh, to do better overall, right? To solve this the fact that we can't go over time. And maybe this is a very tortured analogy, but I think that there's a lot of things where we're kind of like trying to smooth out frictions a lot, and in a lot of other domains. And when you smooth out frictions, it seems nice, but you're not developing these workarounds, right? And this is a case where we're having this discount rate or whatever. This allows having this patience. It's a workaround for this problem, but like you're saying, it's very broad in scope. It could affect how you think about a lot of other things, and it could give you this richer life. And these workarounds that we have to other frictions in life, I don't think these workarounds are just about solving those frictions. I think they have kind of broad um, benefits across a bunch of domains. But if we smooth out these frictions, we don't ever develop that, right? Like you could imagine, oh, I have to go. I live on the third floor of my or the 30th floor of my apartment, and the friction is I had to go up and down the stairs all the time, right? That sucks. And when you build the elevator, and that's good, and but now you were getting exercise and like your heart was much healthier when you were going up and down 30 floors of stairs, right? Now, if you're on the 30th floor, the elevator is probably the correct solution because that's just untenable. But if you're on the third floor, it's not obvious that solving that friction is good for you, right? With the elevator, because you're missing out one, like on the exercise, let's say, but you're also missing out on the fact that, hey, this is going to require me to plan a little more because I don't, if I forgot my book upstairs and I came downstairs, now I got to go up three flights of stairs to pick up my book and come down. So now I have to be a little more thoughtful every time I'm leaving the house. do I have all my things? And I think like we're saying that when we smoothed out this friction with the elevator, we lost a lot potentially. And it seems like the sort of the pitch for every new product seems to be, hey, this is going to smooth out a friction in your life, right? This is the pitch for every app, for every whatever. This is going to smooth out a friction in your life. And I don't think a frictionless life is particularly a good one.
Yeah, yeah. I I understand what you're saying. Like, for instance, the classic idea, this goes back to what you mentioned last time, is when you think about a product like an email, the natural pitch is suddenly now you can send a message very quickly. You can actually, you don't need a letter anymore, right? You need to send a letter that which takes several days, or a telegram to save several days. But the problem is that as you lower the cost of
Oh, you
sending
get
the
the GE
message, you
effects,
lower
of
the cost
course.
of everybody to send the
Yeah.
message. And now suddenly you need to spend hours every day responding to emails that you
That wouldn't
wouldn't
have been sent.
receive
Yeah.
otherwise. And now suddenly everybody's in a worse off equilibrium, potentially, right?
But even throw out the GE stuff. Even just with this one person, this Robinson Crusoe, he's on the third floor versus the first floor. I think it makes a big difference. And I think that, and maybe this is the first time I've thought of it this way, but patience is a way that we develop to cope with the friction of time, the friction that we can't have stuff in the future right now. And that hurts us because we're fundamentally present biased. We fundamentally value right now much more in a different way than periods in the future. And we developed patience as a way to kind of cope with that. I'll say we, evolution, whatever. This was developed as a coping strategy. And it's a coping strategy that ends up being super valuable for all kinds of other stuff, for like productivity and banking and can we fly to the moon and all these other things. Like we could never do these kinds of things if we didn't build this coping strategy of not being able to time travel. Um, like,
I I think that makes sense. Of course, we're compressing a lot of things. That there's lots
yeah,
of information in this, but I like the intuition, this kind of broad intuition that perhaps patience is this kind of a
it's a workaround.
uh, is this kind of byproduct that showed up with evolution. So you did mention this idea of intertemporal discount. Also, when you say beta and delta, I
Yeah,
imagine you were inside a model of
hyperbolic. Yeah,
a hyperbolic discount. So you're talking
yeah,
about also dynamic inconsistency.
yeah.
But also a third reason why we make choices that we later regret is that we have to make choices with information about the future that we are unaware what's going to be the realization of the future. There's
Yeah,
also that aspect, right?
yeah,
And I think all those things that we're talking about, literally all those three dimensions that make our choice currently right now, all that this is moving out of the algorithms and everything that is happening, all of them are making us have a compression that that restrict us to understand the this problem with a higher resolution. What do I mean by that? Like, for instance, we have this abstract view about what our future self will be,
mhm.
in terms of what our future self will be in terms of preferences. This relates to dynamic inconsistency. We have this abstract view about currently, right now, as of today, what is the value that we give to our future self that relates to straight intertemporal discount. And we have this abstract view about what is going to be the world in the future, what's going to be the environment in the future, and so on.
Yeah,
And if people are consuming information that is compressed in a non-representative way, like for instance, when I go to Facebook, all my friends, they don't show videos of them fighting each other. They show videos of them in a party, hanging out and having a lot of
yeah,
fun. It's not a representative sample of reality.
yeah,
But if you and I are going to consume information that is unrepresentative of reality, our models to form those abstractions are going to be unrepresentative too.
yeah.
whenever we are looking at a bunch of friends getting drunk and having fun, we look at it and realize, wow, reality apparently is like that. But we don't see the implied video of those same friends the next morning
Yeah.
feeling bad and perhaps their boss is screaming at them.
Yeah.
So we don't see that second video, right? And but because we only see the first video, we all tend to think, no, apparently that's what things are happening. And expectations are very volatile about that because we do change expectations fairly fast. So I wonder if a lot of that is happening. And this goes back to the idea that I think in our first conversation here, I was I was discussing this kind of intuition I have, which I cannot prove, but this intuition that it looks like the younger generation appears to have this less epistemic humility, which for me, what I mean by epistemic humility is just this less compression awareness, less awareness that whatever you see is not necessarily reality, but
Yeah.
rather specific kinds of compressions of the world, of the reality. So it appears to me that they are less compression aware than, I mean, we all have this problem of compression awareness,
Well,
but it does look like this shows up more often to younger generations.
I mean, I guess maybe this is what you mean when you say compression, but I think that it's when I think of the word compression, I think that it's unbiased, but just more noise, kind of, you know. Whereas,
Yeah,
but I think what you're talking about more is
no.
that no, you're adding. It's not just that the reality is compressed; it's also biased. We're getting a very biased.
Uh, what I mean by compression per se is just that the world is just too complex. The only way you can make sense of the world is by compressing it
Yeah,
somehow to make sense of the world. You need to have some axioms
yeah, and
as a
and
starting
it need
point.
not be an
That's a normal
unbiased
thing.
compression. Yeah,
Now, the question is whether those axioms are biased or not. That leads the compression to be biased. And
yeah,
my argument is that I mean, it's really hard to not think about those compressions as not biased. I mean, in the examples I just told you, that's obvious because
yeah.
people make actually decisions on whether to
Right.
report something or not, like whether to speak in YouTube, whether to put something in Facebook. All those things for sure will be biased. And to the extent that this is disproportionately likely to be the training data in AI, everything else that comes downstream from that, including AI and all these things, to the extent that AI is pretty much in all kinds of facets of life in ways that we cannot see,
Yeah,
all those things are happening. But I say even earlier, right? Even earlier than that, like whenever I feel bad, I'm less likely to call my friends. Whenever I feel good, I call my friends, right? My friends do not have a representative sample of me.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whenever any person is uh, thinking and there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in the way they are thinking because they're trying to make sense of the world, they are less likely to speak.
Yeah.
Whenever, going back to the last thing that you and I discussed last time, whenever I decide to speak something, it is because I have this intuition that what I am about to speak is going to be valuable for more than me. And that means I have this illusion of objectivity
Yeah.
that I probably am wrong about that. But the kinds of people that think that whatever they think is fully subjective, they will never speak anything.
Yeah.
So you always have compressions that by definition must be biased. If I were to put a finger on the specific feature that makes them particularly biased, is this idea of objectivity, this illusion of objectivity. So it's definitely subjective, and yet it feels more objective. It's definitely uh, with more frictions, and yet it feels with less frictions, right? All those things are happening in that direction. And there's an information uh, limitation in terms of how communications happen. So I don't see how we can even solve that problem of
Yeah.
changing that. I think the way to solve this problem might be to increase the tolerance, which is this idea of compression awareness. Increase awareness that whatever you looking about reality must be a compression. And I take your point that compression is not necessarily biased compression, but I do not see, I think the limitations of the production function of communication and therefore training data and so on leads them to be biased, I think.
Well, it's also not obvious whether you want to be sampling more or less information, right? It could be the case that you're better off in an information poor world. Uh, right.
By information, yeah, the issue here is that how we measure information, right? So if you're talking about, if you'll
You
be
get you
better
get
off by not watching the news, for instance. I think the signal to noise ratio in the news is so low these days that I think that's kind of an obvious point,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
But the problem is that if you were to measure information, you're going to measure information so that, like, as a bit, if you
Yeah.
measure information as
Let's
a
just
bit, then noise count as much as signal. If you want to count information as a meaningful bit, or some, we need to create syntax to really make sense about
let's
what
keep
will be
it.
the epistemic unit of information,
So
right?
let's say there's some very simple model. There's some scalar state of the world, right? And we can get signals about the state of the world, right? And these signals can be biased, right? I don't think you can make any result about whether you want more or fewer signals. Like it's
Agree.
going to depend on, we need much more
At least I
structure.
cannot think
We
about.
got to
Yeah.
put a lot more structure on this problem to decide whether we want more or fewer. But let me add one tiny little thing that will collapse it pretty quickly. Let's say that there's also this notion of reflection that takes time. And if you reflect on something, you're able to reduce the bias of the signal slightly. Okay?
Oh, I see. Like, it's almost like reflection is doing some kind of moving average and
Exactly.
reducing. Yeah.
Exactly. If you reflect, you can sort of parcel out some of the bias. You can't do it
Mhm.
perfectly. I mean, maybe you can, but not necessarily. It's going to be much more highly likely that more information is going to be worse because we have a time budget for reflection, right? and and we're not going to be able to scrub out the bias from all these signals, right? I think this very overly simplistic model is like the model of the world now. And we can throw in, if you want, this idea that we think we underestimate how much bias there is in these signals, right? Because that which is going to make us under reflect, right? And we're going to get overly biased, and that's gonna make us much less informed about the true state of the world. Like I think that the real this the salient trade-off has to do with more information, and it's like a quality quantity trade-off. Like how much time are you able to spend with the information versus going out and getting new information? If the new information is unbiased, then maybe you don't want to spend time with it. Maybe you just get more samples and you'll figure it out, right? Like if you're running a drug trial, you don't have to read every patient's files after you see what happens. Just get a bigger and bigger and bigger sample of patients, right? That's what you should be doing. But in a
But the
world
idea
where
of reflection, so I think reflection is one specific compression that relates to that, right? So I think a word that exists that speaks to a lot of that is the notion of self-regulation, right? Because if you think about it, the moment you, or self-awareness, this goes back to the idea of meditation, right? So I deal with this a lot with my kids. So oftentimes they are in a mood that would lead them to process information very badly and therefore make bad decisions.
yeah,
And this happens all the time with me too. So even earlier today, I woke up in a mood that I was not well. What did I do? First of all, I have enough skills right now as a 47-year-old man. I have enough skills to realize that there was a problem that I was having, and I went to do my exercise. And suddenly here am I, and I feel good, you know. So the skill that is missing there is self-awareness. As in, the moment you are self-aware, you're more likely to understand, am I in a good position to make a decision or not? Or
yeah,
am I, and then perhaps reflection
same
is
thing.
just
I
one
think it's
way
your
in which you
equivalent.
could
It's
do,
one
right?
manifestation. Yeah,
Yeah,
Reflection is the
reflection is,
self-awareness for information.
let's say that you don't care about any kind of self-regulation, like we talked about, or self-awareness, you just take a long time to decide, then it's likely that you will see from different perspective, more likely, right? Just because your hormones are going to be changing during this period, your hunger is going to change, your thirst is going to change, your energy is going to change, lots of different things in your life is going to change as you are paying attention to this decision, and therefore you're going to have almost like a broader perspective than if you take the decision very quickly. That is like a heuristic, right? It could be a heuristic to solve problems that are very complex, that require a lot of self-awareness and things like that. But the idea in general of making decisions and being aware of where you are before you make decisions, this is a skill that would allow you to make not only this specific good decision, which can be measured, but several other good decisions that can be measured. So that goes back to this idea that I was saying before, that it looks like it's almost like there's uh, the set of skills that you really need to learn to
Lower
do
dimensional.
better in life is substantially lower. There's a bottleneck there, right? Substantially lower than the set of things that people try to optimize for.
Yeah.
And that becomes a major problem, I think, because the problem is that, as you know, this is a classic problem in math. If you optimize one of those things, but there's a budget of attention to do all those things, there's going to be a negative correlation between one thing you're optimizing and the other thing that perhaps you like to. So the kinds of people that are really good in terms of money, that may be, all else constant, really bad in mental health issues, right? Or something like that.
I think the outcomes that people optimize over tend to be zero sum, whereas the inputs that it would be good to optimize over tend to be positive sum, right? If you're more patient.
In my example, for sure. I think in general they might be not zero sum, but I think in my example, yes.
No, but maybe that's. But no, oftentimes they're competing with one another, whereas the inputs that we're talking about are much more complementary to each other.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about how you allocate your scarce resources, like energy, attention, things like that.
Yeah.
And the moment you allocate more on one thing, you will not get some of the other things you are not allocating on.
So the question is, so that's where I'm raising the thing that, no, I think that it's true that if we're talking about skills, like, oh, my skills are ballet, soccer, and flying airplanes. Well, ballet and soccer might have some complementarities there, but whatever. Chinese, soccer, and flying airplanes. The more I do spend time on one, I have less time for the others, for sure. But when we're talking about these sort of these primitive, these building blocks, like patience and conscientiousness and kindness or something like that. Now, when I work on one, it's effectively
exactly. I agree with that.
Building my budget. And I think it's almost like unique about the fundamentals as opposed to the downstream stuff. The downstream stuff is way more to be zero sum, whereas the upstream stuff is way more likely to be positive sum.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think this relates to the idea of stepping stone habits. So the concern about that, this goes back to the previous point that you made like a long time ago for me, which is this idea, this fixation that people have with what can be measured, right? Like, for instance, you don't see an exam in elementary school where you can actually measure your degree of delayed gratification or your degree of self-awareness. You can measure it indirectly, because those kinds of kids tend to work harder, tend to do more stuff, but you don't measure it directly. Right. And what you measure directly is how much is 5 plus 6. You do measure that directly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is interesting. I think it's all connected, right? In ways that are hard to think about how to solve. This is great. Cool, man.
All right.
Good talking to you.
Yeah, good stuff.